Well, hello everyone. Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, where you should never smoke in pajamas because you might start a fire and burn your face. Well, here we are in the Frank Zappa One Album at a Time series, and we're up to this one. Yes, Thingfish. And yeah, so I haven't been looking forward to doing this video, but I need to do it as I go through the catalog. So we'll just get to it. So yeah, it's kind of tough to be enthusiastic about this record, about this release, because there really isn't anything enthusiastic about it. There isn't really anything that I can recognize as salvageable. But yeah, I'll get to more specific reactions later. So this is the 3-record box set. All right, we have this on the back here on Barking Pumpkin Records. And as I open it here, it comes with this, the libretto. It's Ike Willis as the Thingfish. And right, yes, it is put together very much like a libretto that you would get from an opera. And then, of course, the individual records on the Barking Pumpkin label. And we also I have them now in these sleeves, but then, it did come with this original insert, and then the original sleeves, pretty much the same for each one, with the warning label that Zappa was starting to put on the various releases about a truly free society fearing certain forms of art. Nothing to fear here, although there's nothing of any remote quality on here, in my opinion. I have the Rykodisc of this as well, which was also released double CD in 1984, and then I believe there was another Rykodisc reissue in 1995. And then the Zappa Records double CD was released in September of 2012. So, has the picture on here, and then also a smaller version of the libretto. Some interesting things about this that I really didn't know initially when I first started researching and checking up on this release. This was it was a sprawling project that began in 1976 and went all the way through to 1984. So it's a combination of studio recordings and live recordings with studio overdubs. Usually the situation was that the live recording was being used for its background music, and then new vocals were overdubbed. Sometimes the original vocals were retained, but again were subdued into the background. Now the musicians that are heard on this in the older material, going back to 1976, but they're not credited in the booklet. They include Captain Beefheart on harmonica, Roy Estrada on vocals, Motorhead Sherwood on tenor saxophone, Ruth Underwood on synthesizer, and Denny Wally on slide guitar. So all these folks appear uh, and some of the earlier recordings that were used in putting this together. Now, in the newer material, which was taken from, again, 1980s recordings and also from the material that was put together for this particular release. Quite a few. We've got Jay Anderson on string bass, Arthur Barrow on electric bass, Dale Bozio on vocals, Terry Bozio on vocals, Napoleon Murphy Brock on vocals, Bob Harris on trumpet, keyboards and vocals, Ed Mann on percussion, Tommy Mars on keyboards, Robert Martin on tenor saxophone and keyboards, Scott Tunis on bass, Steve Vai on guitar, Chad Wackerman on drums, Johnny Guitar Watson providing vocals, Ray White on guitar and vocals, Chuck Wilde on piano, and Ike Willis on vocals, the lead role of Thingfish, and then Frank Zappa on guitar, synclavier, bass, keyboards, and vocals. So yeah, there are 8 previously released recycled tracks with overdubs put into this record, and they come from You Are What You Is, Zoot Allures, A Ship Arriving, or not a ship, it's Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch, and also from Tinseltown Rebellion. And it is the recycled material beyond the other material even, but the recycled material is the Achilles heel of this release. So the album concept, I'm going to read from some passages here from the big note. But yeah, the album concept, Frank Zappa recalled saying, "It began with me thinking about this joke that Captain Beefheart used to make about something called Boona hands. And the concept of Boona hands was like people dancing and their hands puffed up like balloons. And while I'm working on Wonton On, I heard the result of putting these backwards vocals on top of a forwards track. I could see these Boona hands appearing, these big puffy hands. Well, I see their hands, but what are they wearing? And then I just got this vision of people with heads like a potato and lips like a duck in Aunt Jemima clothes. And then suddenly there was a story to go with them." So, yeah, I mean, there we go. Potato-headed, duck-billed, Aunt Jemima clothes wearing Thingfish. So there are 2 competing storylines in here, and one of them is about the Mammy Nuns, and then the other story is about this Harry and Rhonda going to see a Broadway show that ends up being the story of their lives. So the Mammy Nuns part probably had potential. I think there was some potential with that. But it's, again, the rest of the material is really disappointing, is going to be putting it mildly. Anyway, then the other thing that Thingfish does is it inserts this rather absurd conspiracy theory regarding the origin of AIDS. Frank Zappa said, "The simple thought behind the album is that somebody manufactured a disease called AIDS. They were developing it as a weapon, and they tested it on convicts the same way that they used to give syphilis to black inmates in U.S. prisons." Now, Zappa misspoke there. They didn't give it to black inmates in prison. They gave it to free black men. So that's documented, that's fact. he goes on to say. So we take it one step further, and they're concocting this special disease, which is genetically specific to get rid of all highly rhythmic individuals and sissy boys. So I postulate that they do this test in a prison, and part of the test backfires, and these mutants are created. I could show you a book which has an extract from the 1971 or 1972 congressional record where a man is asking the Congress for money to develop a biological weapon that could be genetically specific. This is not fiction, Zappa said. Of course, none of Zappa's hypotheses address the fact that 4 of the high-risk groups recognized in 1982 at the time of the emergence of AIDS were male homosexuals, intravenous drug users, hemophiliacs, and Haitian immigrants, and none of these groups are genetically defined. So anyway, so it's problematic in its structure, narrative structure as well. Now, this was going to be a stage production. He wanted it to, be on Broadway. That's why you've got this complete libretto with stage directions. And according to Frank, he said, he's been quoted to say that some guy in 1986 wanted to produce it for Broadway, but the terms weren't good enough. So he declined on that. Then some guy in 1993 wanted to produce it as off-Broadway, negotiating over 2 years. Apparently there was some negotiating going on. And Frank said that it might or might not happen. And then Ike Willis told Glenn Leonard in 2010 via email that Frank told Ike Willis, the week before Frank died, that he'd been talking with Whoopi Goldberg about producing it as a film. Now, eventually there was an authorized adaptation, was presented by the Stagecraft Entertainment Company in London in August of 2003. So it did make it to the stage, although I'm not exactly sure in what form, how true to the original libretto that this was presented. Anyway, the dialogue throughout the record contains allusions to a lot of Broadway musicals, particularly Oklahoma and Peter Pan. But there are some other allusions to Hello Dolly, to Annie, to Dreamgirls, and then the Mammy Nuns concept might be an allusion. It's been suggested by others that it might be an allusion to The Sound of Music. Now, this is kind of where the development, in my opinion, is starting to go off the rails. So many of the Thingfish characters were based on characters from the old Amos and Andy show, including the Thingfish character that was inspired by George Kingfish Stevens, a character in the Amos and Andy. Now, for you younger kids out there, Amos and Andy was a radio show from 1926 to 1960. And the main characters were these 2 African-American proprietors of this independent taxi cab company. Kingfish was the leader of their lodge, the Mystic Knights of the Sea. Now, this show, Amos and Andy, was conceived by 2 white men who also portrayed all the characters. All the characters are African-American, all right? Now, there was also a TV show, Amos and Andy, that ran from 1951 to 1953, which was the first dramatic TV show or TV series in which the entire cast was black. This was denounced the show, the radio show, and also the TV show was denounced by the NAACP for perpetuating stereotypes. So, yeah, Frank obviously had some things to say about that as well. Because Thingfish, all right, so there's this pattern of speech that Ike Willis developed for the character Thingfish that was based on the African-American poet and novelist Paul Laurence Dunbar, who lived from 1872 to 1906. So Ike Willis introduced Dunbar or Dunbar's work to Frank. So that's kind of how the dialect developed that you hear from Thingfish. Yeah, this is about the Amos and Andy connection. Frank has said that Thingfish's speech pattern is, quote, a pseudo-Negrocious dialect originated by an actor named Tim Moore in the TV version of Amos and Andy. He was severely punished for it. The NAACP made him pay for it with his own one-way ticket to Fresno. It is the tradition in America to reward artistry with contempt and ignorance with outright praise. Americans live in terror of excellence and will do anything to avoid contact with it. Now, those last two things that Frank said, I heartily agree with him. And you can see it happening right now in the U.S., where art and anything of any intellectual nature is derided, and then ignorance is elevated for the masses, and it's really quite problematic. But there was a lot of, it's just kind of interesting that there were a lot of people who got behind this concept. And I was really quite surprised about this. So, that they would take this concept very seriously. So, for example, there was this fellow, Chris Maxfield, who compares Thingfish to the frogs by Aristophanes. Listen to this. Aristophanes uses frogs to illustrate his belief in the need for inspirational artists in a time of national crises. While satirizing Greek tragedy, religious belief, the cult of initiates, and the comical representation of Hades, religious figures, the effeminate Dionysus himself, and literary criticism. Now, on the other hand, Frank Zappa uses Thingfish to illustrate the need for truly creative artists in a time of political repression, Reagan's White House years, while satirizing Broadway, televangelism, male and female relations, parenthood, and theatrical criticism, just as Aristophanes utilized the characters of Euripides and Aeschylus to criticize both one another and, by extension, Aristophanes' own work. As an old comedy playwright, Zappa used the character of the evil prince, it's one of the major characters in Thingfish, in his guise as a theatrical criticizer to ridicule from within Zappa's own production. Frank Zappa anticipates the hostile reaction his show would likely have received at the hands of the Broadway critics. One senses by extension that he blamed those critics for destroying all attempts by theater producers to try something daring, creative, and different. Aristophanes, on the other hand, desired a return to the good old days of Athens with Aeschylus, where a sense of balance and stability could be relied upon, at least in a Greek tragedy. And sorry for the sounds of the world intruding. The very freedom Zappa desired is exactly the freedom Aristophanes feared, but each man was trying in his own way to make his world a better place. wow, that's just, that just sounds like a lot of apologetics to me, over this material. Yeah, I just don't see it. So now some people say they like this. They like Thingfish, which is, fine. I mean, there are people who like a lot of things that I don't like, all right? And there's things that I really enjoy, music that I really enjoy that other people can't stand. That's fine. What I've observed, though, and this is just my own personal observation, many, not all, but many of the people who say they like Thingfish and enjoy it also say that this was the first Frank Zappa they ever heard. So, yeah, there's all this other recycled material in Thingfish that someone who was unfamiliar with the vastness of Frank Zappa's catalog, will hear some of this material and not understand that it is recycled. And, it's good material in its own right. And so I could see someone who is unfamiliar with the entire catalog, the whole concept of project object. I could see them as, liking Thingfish. But I am astonished at times when I hear someone who is very familiar with the Frank Zappa catalog, going all the way back to Freak Out and everything in between, and saying they like this, that they think it's a decent release. They say it's not his best. Clearly, it is not. But they still say it's listenable. Well, to each his own, I guess. And then there was something that Ike Willis said about when they were working on it. He said the script would change every day. The lyrics would change every day. A lot of the music would change every day, so that we'd have to go back and do a lot of things over. Not because they were wrong, but just because we got more ideas. A lot of things we'd leave, but there might be certain things Frank, wasn't quite satisfied with. Through that kind of tweezage, it got much better. It got tighter. So yeah, that was Ike Willis, quoted in an interview by Matthew Gallagher. And you can find that in the big note. So that's the background on Thingfish. Now I shall attempt to go through the album tracks. It opens with this prologue, which has this guitar, and that's what it's called, prologue. And it's this guitar riff, which has a pretty interesting story behind the guitar riff, okay? So what happened is, it was recorded, that guitar riff, that opening bit before they start all the other stuff, was recorded in the Stadthalle in Vienna, because Frank really loved the way the acoustics of that hall created this echo that would just go on and on and on. So what he did is he took his guitar and he played this riff and then put it on a loop and just let it play in the hall, and then, recorded that. So that's how it starts. Really quite interesting. But then, we've got Ike Willis as the character Thingfish setting up the story in this prologue. Then it goes into the next track, Mammy Nuns. And as I said, the Mammy Nuns is probably the most original composition on the entire record. These mutants, that their clothes actually sprout from their bodies. And yeah, it was an original idea that really didn't go anywhere because it got contaminated. It couldn't be worked out, I feel, because it got contaminated by all the other tomfoolery that was put into the creation of Thingfish. Then we get into the next track, Harry and Rhonda, where the characters Harry and Rhonda are introduced, and this is when things really start going downhill fast. So they're going to this Broadway show, and they're having this conversation before the show, expressing some of their disappointment over, they're not, so far they're not seeing what they would expect to see. And that's kind of how the rest of the record goes. This idea of there's this dialogue or this talking with some subdued music in the background that's just kind of there to fill up space. Very much the entire album is like that. Then we go into the track Galoot Up to Date, which is borrowed tracks from The Blue Light from Tinseltown Rebellion. And then that is overdubbed with new vocals and drums. And so the record is just continuing to devolve into this way too much exposition. And Ike Willis's character just providing this narrative. And then we get to the Torchum Never Stops, which is a completely repurposed Torture Never Stops. So it's got the instrumental tracks from Zoot Allures, but then we have Napoleon Murphy Brock as the evil prince, an evil prince away out, from the song The Torture Never Stops. So he portrays this evil prince in Thingfish, and he is singing the lead. Again, there's really nothing original here. I mean, he's singing The Torture Never Stops, except he says the Torchum never stops. It's using that style of speech and idiom that Ike Willis's character introduces. But it doesn't even count as any kind of project object content to me. There's no conceptual continuity going on here, which is what you would normally get with all of Frank's work, which is what made it so interesting, a lot of it. But yeah, this is just lazy to me. It's dreck. 10 minutes and 33 seconds of dreck. From the 4:05 mark, 4-minute 5-second mark, to the 8-minute 40-second mark, the song uses the evil prince storyline, which is delivered in a very Broadway style. So Napoleon Murphy Brock is presenting that concept and that storyline, and then it goes, before the song ends, goes back into the Torchum Never Stops. Then we get this very short dialogue segue that is called That Evil Prince. It's a segue that adds nothing, and it offers nothing. Absolutely provides nothing to the storyline, to the record. Then we go into You Are What You Is. Okay, that didn't even change the name of the song. Next 3 songs are like that. You got You Are What You Is, The Mud Club, The Meek Shall Inherit Nothing, all from the album You Are What You Is. It's just repurposed bullshit from the 1981 original that just ruins the 1981 original. Okay, I mean, it's just the Mud Club is. You've got Ike Willis again as Thingfish recreating Frank's original commentary to the song The Mud Club, where Frank is speaking in that somewhat distorted voice about what's going on in the Mud Club. Thingfish is basically reciting that verbatim, with a few other minor tweaks in there. So, and then The Meek Shall Inherit Nothing. Again, it's just more repurposed bullshit. I can't even figure out how is it being incorporated effectively into the Thingfish storyline. But I guess because there is no clear storyline to Thingfish, even though it ostensibly is supposed to have one, maybe that's why I can't see whatever connection. Then we get the track Harry as a Boy. All right, so we're remembering that Harry and Rhonda, all right, that's Dale and Terry Bozzio. So that's Harry as a boy, which to me it also kind of conjures up the idea of Harry from We're Only in It from the Money. Harry, you're a beast, from that. But this is also when it becomes clearer that Harry and Rhonda's lives are being incorporated into the show that they are attending. And it just devolves into this homophobic oratory in an effort, I think, to portray the idiocy of white people in general. Then comes the song, He's So Gay, which is this absurd follow to Harry as a Boy that not only oversimplifies the gay community's perceived proclivities, but in connection with Harry as a Boy, it suggests that it's normal for anyone to progressively slide from being heterosexual into becoming homosexual, merely by being triggered by some kind of superficial event, such as in Harry's case, women getting jobs in business and wearing suits. That triggers him into this progressive slide into going from being straight to being gay. And this is where I stop listening. This is when I really don't give a shit about this recording anymore. I can no longer bear to listen to any more of this sludge, because that's what it is. I would rather listen to the Illinois Enema Bandit on an endless loop than to listen to this garbage. It's just, yeah. So that's Thingfish. And that's my take on Thingfish. And I certainly welcome your reactions in the Down Under. And I want to just hear what your thoughts are about Thingfish. Even if your thoughts are, be brave. If you like it, express why you like it. I'll be watching the comments. I don't want people ridiculing each other for either liking it or disliking it. There's no need for the comments to turn or devolve into ad hominem. I really genuinely, would like to hear your thoughts and opinions on Thingfish, whether they are in agreement with mine or whether they are contrary to mine. And certainly don't think of it, though, as your opportunity to persuade me to change my mind. No, that's not going to happen. Also, be aware that I am on Instagram under the name NewsDude76. That's NEWZDUDE76. And I also have a Facebook page called Calvin Wazoo, where you can find videos that I create, as well as other music-related videos and other music-related content. I post it there. Some interesting stuff to go along there. Gee, hit a thumbs up, please. Even if you are in complete disagreement with me in terms of, because I'm just sharing my opinion, the music is what it is, and some people will find value in it and some people will not. It is what it is. Certainly, that's all it is. The thumbs up does help, though, with the distribution of my content, and gets it in front of more eyeballs for more people to see. I hope you were able to sit through this. And I'm sorry I didn't get through the rest of the record to talk about the other trash. I was going to say, I wanted to say tracks, but yeah, it was going to come out as trash. And anyway, thanks for watching. And always remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.